ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Given the stark difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, it's hard to fathom there are some Americans still struggling to decide who they'll vote for in just 6 weeks' time. But while they're disengaged and often, frankly, confused, it's these undecided voters who could swing the result. Today, we look at who they are and what they're saying with Margaret Talev, Axios contributor and director of the Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism and Citizenship. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Margaret, you have spent a long time talking to undecided voters in the United States. You and your colleagues have spent hours interviewing them. They come from all walks of life. How did you pick them and how did you find them?
Well, when we do our focus groups, it's a little bit different if you go to a rally or a man on the street. You just talk to as many people as you can. When we're doing these focus group panels, we work with a recruiting firm, and part of the screen when we are looking for undecided voters is to say, have you made up your mind yet?
I don't think my vote's going to matter. It's just going to be another politician. It's like choosing between a bag of garbage and another bag of garbage.
Well, I think if he get elected, we're going to be divided more than ever. We're going to be more racist than ever.
I'm going to vote for who I think is going to do the best for my family.
Okay, and abortion's not part of that consideration?
At this point, no.
When she's asked a question, if she doesn't know the answer, she just cackles, and that drives me crazy.
It seems almost unimaginable that at this point, 6 weeks before the election, someone wouldn't really know which one they preferred. But what we have learned over the course of this year, and even at this point in the race, is that there are really different kinds of undeciders, and almost no undecided voters really doesn't know who they prefer. So for some of them, the question really is, are they going to bother voting? There are a small number inside that undecided pool who truly are torn.
Okay, so before we delve further into the issues that really matter most, I suppose, to these undecided voters, just tell me, Margaret, how important are these voters in deciding the election result?
Sam, it's such a great question because the truth is we can't even agree on how many undecided voters there really are. There are probably fewer now than there were a few months ago, but the estimates from pollsters really range from the idea that there's a few, 3 to 5% of voters are undecided, to the idea that it could be 12 or 15%. People talk a lot about 10%, but it's sort of a guesstimate.
I gather it also matters which states they live in because the swing states are so important during this election.
That's a very good point. And part of the reason why is that we actually see in the polling that people in those swing states, in particular the 7 most key battleground states in the United States, are much more likely to say that they're undecided. Even a small share of voters, even if it is just, 3%, 5%, could absolutely make the difference. You look at the last election, so key states were won with less than 1 percentage point. So that's why there's so much time and effort spent on undecided voters, even though they're sort of the hardest group to get a grip on and to compel to the polls.
So, Margaret, I want to get a better sense now from you about what you've learnt from these undecided voters, about what might sway them to vote and who they vote for. Some of the interviews that you've done with them are just absolutely fascinating, the things that they say. Of course, it's a large and diverse group of people that you've been chatting to. The economy, though, seems to be the number one issue that they care about.
It's the number one issue with American voters overall, and it's the number one issue with these undecided voters. And what does the economy mean? The economy means inflation, and it means your wages, and it means your ability to afford housing.
I have children and grandchildren, and now I'm helping them with their groceries because even though their salary is the same, everything's increased by 20 and 30%.
Now people are having multiple jobs where in good years, you would have one job to pay for the necessity of the cost of living.
All these money going out to other countries like Ukraine and going to wars when we got people here that don't eat, don't sleep right, don't have a shirt on their back. That's the stuff that pisses me off.
These undecided voters talk an awful lot about these ideas and about just feeling like their standard of living was more comfortable, was better 4 or 5 years ago. But you see both candidates now at this stage in the race, both former President Trump and Vice President Harris, pursuing really popular ideas that economists absolutely hate in order to try to win over these voters.
If you don't make your product here, then you will have to pay a tariff, a very substantial tariff, when you send your product into the United States.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
But these undecided voters might be swayed to vote for Trump because they thought they were just better off when he was in power, and they want it to be like that again.
That is true, and it's for a few reasons. One is because on the merits, before the post-COVID inflation kicked in, things were cheaper and interest rates were lower, and everybody remembers that. It's also true that just psychologically, a lot of these voters, they think of the way Donald Trump has always marketed himself. I'm a businessman. I'm, a billionaire or a millionaire, depending on who you believe. And for a lot of these voters, those are messages that click with them, and they say, I believe that. I think, you need a businessman to lead us out of this.
Yeah, I think Trump has more of a head for economics. Again, as a businessman and again with budgeting, and he just understands what it takes to be a successful businessman.
So the economy is a really big issue for these undecided voters. We know abortion is also really significant for American women. So what did these voters have to say about that?
Pretty consistently in our focus groups and our conversations with undecided voters, particularly among women, but not exclusively among women, reproductive rights, which is how Vice President Harris has framed the abortion conversation, is her strongest argument. But will it be the decisive issue on which they vote? We see a lot of women really grappling with this, like abortion is, or reproductive rights, or privacy, or your ability to make decisions with your doctor. They say that is a top vital issue to them, but hey, they got to pay the bills too.
I'm a firm believer in a woman's right to choose, and that's going to be what I base maybe my vote on.
Well, help me understand that, right? Because before you told me you were going to take Trump, didn't you?
I struggle. I mean, had you not brought up the abortion issue, I may have just stayed where I was, but it is a struggle for me.
Some of the voters you interviewed seemed rather confused about what Trump's stance is on abortion. They just didn't really have a good sense of that.
It's true, and also many of the voters that we have heard from say they don't really have a good sense of what Vice President Harris stands for at all, even though she has been vice president for 3.5 years, was in the Senate before that.
I feel like I have to pick between the lesser of the two evils, and I think he's at least a known entity. I know what to kind of expect with him.
All of this is to some extent because, and we see this more with undecided voters than we do with voters who have already committed to their decision, that these tend to be voters who do not consume a lot of political news on a regular basis. They kind of dip in, they dip out. They got a lot of their news or their information from social media websites, from conversations with friends, from memes, from something they saw on TikTok or X that made them laugh or that scares them. Then they hit forward, they share it with friends. These don't tend to be voters who are poring over the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times to learn the nuances of policy positions from these candidates. And so, of course, it makes sense that they would say, I just don't know that much about these candidates.
What are the other issues then that, they're talking about that might sway their vote? or at least get them out to vote.
Yes, it's interesting. With some of the younger undecided voters, we have seen their concerns about Gaza, concerns about U.S. policy vis-a-vis Israel. That has been an issue that some younger undecided voters have said is what is prompting them to be non-committal towards Vice President Harris. But they're grappling with, do they have to choose either one of them?
But my red line is genocide. So supporting either or would definitely make me feel complacent to the lack of wanting change or being, fearful of change.
But again, with most undecided voters, we just don't see Israel-Gaza being a dominant issue at all. Mm-hmm. The top issues that we hear over and over again do tend to be the economy, border security, and again, reproductive rights and women's rights to control their own bodies.
Margaret, let's look now at what Kamala Harris and Donald Trump can do in the next 6 weeks to swing these voters their way and to get them to go out and vote. Or is it a bit too late now?
I don't think it's too late for either candidate, but I will tell you that early voting has already begun in a handful of states, including some important states, a state like Virginia, which has been a swing state in the past. Many, many millions of Americans already are casting their ballots now or will be literally in the coming days or the next couple of weeks. What we see Harris and Trump both doing is courting voters on the economy by telling them things they want to hear that sound like tax cuts, tax breaks, more money in your pocket. And we see both candidates trying to scare voters about the other one. It's a tried and true tactic. But remember, this is the first election, presidential election, after January the 6th, and this is an election where abortion rights are on the ballot. And so as you're looking at these swipes from one candidate to the other, you're going to see, again, this theme of abortion rights, reproductive rights, and you're going to see each attacking the other as someone that everybody should be afraid of.
And her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
And she's bleeding out in a car in the parking lot? She didn't want that. Her husband didn't want that.
It's bewildering for voters, and we're hearing this year more than ever before that voters don't know what they can trust. They don't know what news sources they can trust. They don't know what candidates they can trust. The debacle that the world has heard about with the Republican presidential ticket spreading debunked rumors about immigrants in Ohio eating people's pets is just another example of efforts to scare voters about the other team politically.
Yeah. All right. Well, Margaret, as you've mentioned, these are voters that are largely disengaged from the political process. They're not news consumers. So half the battle, I assume, is actually getting them to vote when it's not compulsory to vote in the United States. So from all you've heard from these voters, do you think they will actually get up, go out the door and cast a ballot?
It's such a good question because you're right. Not only is voting not compulsory, but a lot of people believe in the United States that compulsory voting is truly un-American, right? And if you really are undecided or you feel undecided all the way up to Election Day, there's certainly a degree of apathy attached to that. It's hard to be motivated to vote when apathy is your overriding emotion. We're going to see both candidates pull out the stops on celebrity endorsements, getting on TikTok, trying to find voters where they are these days. You are going to see both of the candidates trying to grab those undecided voters any way they can, give them short visuals, short bites that either make them laugh or terrify them, and ultimately drive apathetic, undecided voters to the polls.
Margaret Talev is a senior contributor with the news site Axios and director of the Syracuse University's Institute for Democracy, Journalism and Citizenship, based in Washington. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed and Cara Jensen McKinnon. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.
This is meant to be a big year for democracy. And yet we're seeing populism and nationalism taking hold and strongman leaders grabbing power.
It's a nightmare.
He wants to be remembered for something.
It's sinister.
Nobody can criticize him without going to jail.
He never get trial.
He got away with it.
He got away with it.
I'm Hamish McDonald, and I'm back with a brand new season of Take Me to Your Leader. Catch Dictators and Demagogues on Sunday mornings at 9:30 on ABC Radio National, or anytime on the ABC Listen app.